Hey, I'm Josh Kavinsky. I'm a reporter at TPM and co-host of the Social Club podcast, and I'm here hosting that very same podcast with Joe Ragazzo. How's it going, Joe?
It's going good, Josh. Going good. Feeling good after that. What we just recorded with Joel Christensen. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like we need to come up with epithets for one another. For the pod for this. Just for listeners, we had Joel Christensen on. He is a professor of classics at CUNY Graduate Center, but he's devoted his life to studying Homer and Homeric epic. And so we had him on to talk about the movie The Odyssey and much more. And if you listen to the end, you'll get to hear him speak from memory in ancient Greek, which was crazy.
Doesn't it feel, I don't know, I feel like it's really weird. I feel like I'm under like a spell. It was like someone was speaking Elvish for a little bit. It was very like, a lot of like Florian, and I get what he means. It did have like a musical quality to it. It was a great conversation though. He could speak. He was able to talk about a number of disciplines. You talk about classics, you talk about ancient Greece, you're really talking about philosophy, you're talking about literature, you're talking about history, you're talking about language and linguistics. And he was able to seamlessly like move in and out of all of those subjects while speaking and saying interesting things about contemporary culture and ancient Greece and the Odyssey itself. So there's a lot to dig into, and I hope the listeners have enjoyed as much as we enjoyed having the conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that he's a professor of classics, but you're right that it was interdisciplinary. Like he really did have he clearly had like a lot of expertise like in all these different areas, which made it like so I don't know, it was just so interesting to hear him talk. I really hope you guys enjoy, and I think we will maybe adopt some of these practices, burning goat entrails, analyzing livers for at least I will, in terms of how I choose what stories to work on. So
I'll be pretty pissed though if I come home from work one day and there's like 30 suitors like just all over the apartment. Like,
well, you got to work on your bow. You got to work on your bow stretching skills in that case. Yeah. Okay. Enjoy the episode.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Hey, this is Josh Kavinsky, and I'm here today with Joel Christensen. He's a professor of classics at the CUNY Graduate Center. Thanks for coming on, Joel. We really appreciate it.
Hi, thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah. So look, we're really excited to talk about the Odyssey with you. And that's partly in light of the recent Christopher Nolan movie. But we really thought that, because you devoted so much of your life to studying Homer, we really wanted to talk about this with you. So I think just first off, I think we were just really curious to hear what you thought of the movie. I mean, both just on its own terms and also how it compares to the Homeric epic.
So I can go on for a very long time about this. I'll try to keep it within some boundaries. So I've seen the movie twice. The first time I saw it, my immediate reaction was, this movie is a piece of dog shit. It was very negative. I really wasn't happy. And I had to be calmed down. In fact, during parts of the movie, my wife was next to me. I watched it in Kips Bay. And she's like, everyone can see you. You realize that, can't you? And so I immediately had to step back and say, all right, listen, everything you know about how myth works is being activated in this film. It's an adaptation of an Odyssey as an idea, not necessarily an adaptation of the Homeric Odyssey. And furthermore, film is not epic. Right. I mean, how do you take 12,000 lines or 18 hours of performance time and like squish it down to 3 hours and put it on film? So I immediately went to a bar and talked to a bunch of friends about it. My feeling evolved. And then when I saw it a second time, I didn't take notes. I just sat and watched it. And my appreciation for it increased as its own thing. Right. And so I'll just mention a few things first about how it is Homeric, and what I think the choices were that made it work. And then if you want to ask me in a bit why I had such a visceral negative reaction to start, I'm happy to do that too. But sure. The first thing is that, Nolan faced a very difficult task that ancient authors didn't. And that is that ancient audiences knew the basic story. They knew the primary elements. So they would know about Odysseus and Penelope being separated. They would know about the dog. They would know about the Trojan horse. All of those things would have been self-evident. Nolan making a blockbuster that needed to make, what, $300 million, $400 million to break even, couldn't rely on audiences knowing those things. And so his ring structure in the movie of starting with like Argos as a puppy and Penelope and Odysseus together, and then interweaving the different narrative threads together is really a lot like the Odyssey, right? Which starts by actually postpones Odysseus, but it has parallel narratives, eventually brings them together, and has a somewhat surprising end. And so that's one thing. A second thing that I think people often don't understand is that the Homeric Odyssey was not standard until it became composed, right? It is itself an adaptation of traditional narratives. And we can talk about how we know that if you want. But it is a reception of Odysseus narratives as well. And so another thing I think that's important in that is one of the things that drove me crazy in the first viewing was the repeated things about sea peoples. I'm like, well, that's not a thing in antiquity. Like, it's a thing we acknowledge now. But then I realized what's actually going on is that Nolan is assembling the film as a fantasy for us. And our notion of the past is different from ancient audiences, right? We see the past as, being historical and archaeological, as well as, vehicle for us to go through our concerns. And so the original Odyssey, the Homeric Odyssey, is set at the end of the race of heroes, which, according to the tradition, Zeus started the Trojan War to get rid of the race of heroes, to end an entire era. So I actually think positioning the Odyssey film as coming at the end of an era, but also as anticipating the audience's anxiety about apocalypse and everything going on in the world now wasn't a mistake either, and is something that really grew on me. I think the central thing, though, that Homerists and classicists are struggling with is the depiction of Matt Damon as Odysseus.
Okay.
Because he, one, he gets a happy ending. Unless we take a counter view of the film with him dying in Penelope's arms or it being absurd at the end. He gets a happy ending. Throughout the movie, it's pretty clear that while he can be a jerk sometimes, he's ultimately a good guy. Right. Like he has a lottery for his men at the beginning. He really cares about Sinon. When he comes home, he shows mercy to the suitors who kneel, which is the opposite of what the real Odysseus does. And we get nothing that we get at the end of the Odyssey, which is the murdering of the enslaved women who sleep with the suitors, and mutilation of the cowherd, Melanthius. Those things aren't on the screen. We get a really sanitized Odysseus. And that, again, really bothered me to start. But reflecting on it, Homer's Odysseus was not a good guy. Like, he's a nasty individual. And part of it is because the purpose of the Odyssey is to complicate heroes. It's to make us think or understand that there are people who cause suffering to those around them, right? Our conversation about heroes and heroic figures and protagonists in the 21st century isn't like that, right? We have comic book heroes who are more or less good people, but they make some mistakes along the way, or they get weird, or they're arrogant or something. But we don't have figures who could go one way or the other. Like, anti-heroes have their own particular space in our culture. And so you really have to read Damon's Odysseus in, the conversation about heroism now, and understand that, we now see warriors as potentially traumatized coming home from war. We want them to want to come home and have some romance involved in them. And ultimately, as expressions of us, we want them to be good in the end, if possible. And so that was a lot about Nolan's Odyssey. In the end, I've landed on, if I have to rate the movie, a 7 out of 10. I think it's visually really, really good. I think the Circe scene is phenomenal. I think the action scenes, with the exception of the final suitor battle, it's really great. And, as I've reflected on it, I think it's a pretty good adaptation. It's just we just don't seem to have a public discourse that is mature enough or patient enough to get there quickly.
Do you often watch movies like that, or like do you always, if there's like a historical movie coming out, do you kind of go into it with the historian's mindset, or was
Oh
this kind
yeah,
of unique because you knew it was coming? Like you
yeah.
knew, like Josh and I were coming.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the worst person to watch movies with because I don't know if I like movies anymore. No, because I think at some point, like it's because of the economics and the technology, movies aren't as daring as they used to be. Part of this might be my age, but when I was in college, like in a short period, we had Fight Club, Being John Malkovich, Memento, mainstream movies that were really breaking narrative patterns and challenging audiences. Studios can't afford to put those out anymore, right? The real, I think, narrative innovation that we get comes in long form narrative, like television narrative. And that's, I think, been true for a while. So one, I'm not a great movie person. But two, yeah, I mean, I go with different eyes. Like even I was, I guess, a really annoying undergraduate as well. Cause I remember when Gladiator came out, I was like, this is bullshit. Nobody would want to restore the Roman Republic at this point in the history. I can't do this. Right. And then like in grad school, I was in grad school when Troy came out, and like I was like from the beginning of the movie to the end, I was like, this is the most painful experience of my life until I saw Oliver Stone's Alexander, which just turns up the pain to a whole new level, like right past 11. So the answer is perhaps, I can go and have fun with movies. I like a good adventure. And I'm not extremely discerning. Like for me, like, action movies probably peaked with Die Hard. Comedies probably peaked with Office Space. But that's more showing my age than any real discernment.
No,
What
you're
made you
okay.
wanna
I've been
Yeah.
having Josh and I actually had a conversation recently that we thought didn't you say you thought culture basically peaked in the 70s? And we agreed that like
Yeah.
regardless, like I think film did. Like the 70s were a
Yeah.
golden age of film, and there's been good movies since, but like something magic was going on there with the new Hollywood. So I don't know. I kind of think that makes you a good film watcher if that's kind of where you're at.
No, but I think again, there's such little patience for story. I think if we go back to the 70s, if you think about the pacing in movies in the 70s, even early 80s, I was thinking about Raging Bull the other day, right? Just the time it takes to develop the character. If someone redid Raging Bull now, like it would be 90% boxing and like 10% character development, right? When it's the character development makes it worse. Or if someone redid Godfather 2, right? Which again has a similar narrative structure in a way to Nolan's Odyssey, and that there are multiple timelines that are brought together. But can you imagine how fast Godfather 2 would be today? Right? It would be almost like the story would be lost. So I think you're right. Like, I think basically, if we want to go back to ancient literature for a bit, I think there's a sweet spot for art forms, right? When they're first developing, it's experimenting and figure out like the shared grammar of your art form. And you see this really in Greek tragedy and development from Aeschylus to Euripides. And you get to a period where everything's been done. So we're going to redo it, we're experimenting, and we're going to push the boundaries, right? So Euripides is sort of almost wild, like Bruckheimer type in some of his productions, where I think we could put Aeschylus, back and, Scorsese or something.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel the same way about Homer, because Homer comes at the join of different cultures and traditions, right? We're at the end of a long oral tradition, the beginning of sort of written literature as we know it. Somehow the epics made that leap from one to the other. And I think it's at that in-betweenness, at that sort of moment of innovation and change, where you get the most fascinating and impactful art. We have to translate from one period to another, and sort of and appeal to different sort of aesthetic paradigms.
You were saying earlier, like the Odysseus we have in the movie with Matt Damon is kind of humorless, and in Homer, like I think as you alluded to, he's supposed to be cunning, right? And like my friends and I were trying to think of like who is a modern actor that would fit that, and like some names came up, like not Damon, right? Like maybe Pedro Pascal, or like if you want to go back to the 70s, like Jack Nicholson. But like I'm curious, I mean, who do you think like what would like a more faithful portrayal of Odysseus have been?
Well, Yeah, when Damon was first cast, I was very skeptical because the hard thing is I think people can't dislike him. Like Damon's just a really likable guy, and all of his roles show that. Even where he's a little dangerous, like in The Talented Mr. Ripley, his danger, like the threat he represents is contingent upon him being likable, upon people trusting him. So for me, the best opportunity for Damon to have been a good Odysseus would have been like combination like Jason Bourne and Mr. Ripley, like something there where the veneer of kindness or likableness is hiding something far more dangerous underneath. I think we got far more of Matt Damon as the guy who bought a zoo than we got with anything else. But as far as like modern actors, the question is, what type of Odysseus would we be going for, right? If we're going for a playful Odysseus, right, one who's clever. I mean, I honestly don't know if he could have done better than George Clooney did in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Right. But that's a comic, right, sort of Odysseus. I think of modern actors, I don't know. I mean, I don't know who has the depth to do it. Maybe sort of a late 90s Gary Oldman could have pulled it off, right? Someone like that. I'm not quite sure. I would even say that like, and Nolan would have blown up the world if he had done this. I think an Idris Elba could have been a better Odysseus. Thinking back to his, him as in The Wire, or in a show like that. Just having that sort of, you have to be able to inhabit a space where people don't know what you're going to do, where they don't know if you're good or bad, and where they would be happy to dislike you, but also happy to like you if that can turn out. And I just think Matt Damon ends up always being liked.
Uh,
And so that telegraphed the characterization before the movie was even done, right?
I feel like honestly the person that comes to mind to me immediately would have been Cillian Murphy again, because he's so like
Okay. Yeah.
kind of like he could be anything. I don't know. Go either way with
Yeah.
that guy. I mean, that's kind of what his character in Peaky Blinders is with Thomas Shelby. Like you want to like him, but you don't really know that you want to like him actually. He's capable of
Well,
anything.
Well, one of the things I struggle with, and again, this is because I'm like, too much Homer pilled for anybody, is that one of the rare physical descriptions we get in the Iliad of a hero is of Odysseus. And it shows up in book 3. And the scene is like Helen's on the wall of Troy, Priam is there, and they're looking at the heroes, and people are saying, oh, who's that guy? Who's that guy? And they're like, oh, that's Odysseus. And the guy's like, yeah, that's Odysseus. I saw him once. He was at an assembly. When he wasn't talking, he looked like a completely unremarkable schlub. Like you just looked at him like he doesn't know anything, right? Like he doesn't look normal. He's shorter than other people. He's unimpressive. But then he starts talking, and the force of his language was like a blizzard, and he conquered everyone. And so you need someone unassuming, right? Someone you may not notice, or someone who can make themselves unseen. And I'm struggling of thinking of a modern actor who could do it. Like,
to me, that's almost like, this is like, you can't talk about this right now, but like Kevin Spacey, where he just looks like a schlub, but he has his darkness for obvious reasons.
Right.
He can talk, right? Like,
yeah. So, why am I blanking on the movie Kaiser Soze? What was the name of that movie?
Yeah, the
usual suspects.
Usual Suspects. Yeah. So like him in there, but I'm also thinking, and he's not alive anymore, but a slightly thinned down Philip Seymour Hoffman, I think could have pulled off.
Love him.
Yeah. And he almost killed me once. He was shooting something near the village, and he was riding his bike on the sidewalk like an adult shouldn't. And I was this close to getting clipped by Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Did you guys yell at each other or have any kind of like interaction?
Oh, no, nothing. I just was like, holy shit. Right, that's Philip Seymour Hoffman. Right, almost. I think the same week
you didn't ask the gods to curse him.
Yeah, I didn't. The same week. I don't know what was in the water that week. But Kevin Bacon was at Washington Square Park, and he was walking, I guess, with his kids or something. And I walked by him, and I was like, all I wanted to do was like some footloose moves. Fortunately, I can't dance because I probably would have gotten beat up by Kevin Bacon. So anyway, back to. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the Iliad there for a second, and I wanted to get your take on the way Nolan expanded the Odyssey to include things from the Iliad and the Aeneid. How did you think about those creative choices? Did you like them? What was your take on that?
Well, when the previews were first coming out and they had all these scenes that are not in the Odyssey. I was hoping that they were misdirection. I was hoping, all right, these are just gonna be flashback scenes. We're gonna see a little bit of this. And we didn't, right? I mean, only about 45 of the minutes of the movie are on Ithaca, and the close happens really quickly. When I saw the movie, I understood it though. The first time I didn't understand it so well. The second time it really hit home for me. And this is another way in which the movie is Homeric, that I think people undersell. So first, the challenge I talked about before that Nolan was facing, everybody in the ancient world knew the story of the Trojan horse, of the war at Troy, and everything. And so the stakes or the consequences of what happens to Odysseus don't need to be explained in the same way. Right. Most people going to the film in the US and UK, best case scenario, they remember the no man trick. They're going to know about Odysseus and some of his legends, but they might not fully get the whole war thing. And they're not going to come in with a sense of the human cost of it. Right. And so there's a moment when Odysseus, the sort of, denouement of the movie, when Odysseus is there before the screen and Hathaway as Penelope's there in the background. And he's finally piecing together the way he feels about the war, the guilt moment many critics don't like. And he says, the destruction of the walls of Troy was the destruction of the world, something like that, including my home. And so the whole notion that the Trojan horse was both Odysseus's finest moment as a strategic thinker, but was also the moment of his undoing and this trigger of the end of the world, is really Homeric, because Homer chooses the story of the blinding of the Cyclops and makes that the moment of Odysseus's glory and fall as well. There's no indication that prior to the Homeric Odyssey, the Cyclops scene is the thing that sealed Odysseus's doom. Because his men tell him 3 times, don't go into the cave, get out with the cheese as fast as possible, don't boast, and taunt the Cyclops. And Odysseus does all 3 of those things. And basically when he tells his father, when he brags, I'm Odysseus, son of Laertes from Ithaca, it's like doxing yourself. He might as well have given out his social security number to Polyphemus. And so what I think Nolan does is really clever is he doesn't do the same thing. Right. He does the Cyclops scene dirty, and we can talk about that if you want, but he elevates this trick that everybody knows and he makes it a bad thing. Like he makes it the thing that allowed Odysseus to see the senselessness of the slaughter, and in a way opened up the whole film to be an apologetic for Western adventures in the Middle East. I think he made it the Odysseus is our warrior coming home. He understands the technology that he used brought slaughter and pain, and that the world is ending in a collapse because of that first thing he did. So when I think back to bringing together Sinon from the Aeneid to flesh out what Odysseus did there, showing the whole Trojan horse thing, I think it's actually a powerful way of telling a story that gets to that heroic arc, because the Odyssey itself starts with something that's surprising to people. And that's Zeus saying, mortals, they're fools. They're always blaming the gods for making their lives bad when they make their fates worse than they had to be because of their own recklessness. And that repeated line, because of their own recklessness, is attached to the suitors in the Odyssey, the sailors in the Odyssey, and one time to Odysseus. And sidebar, it's the major reason I don't like Emily Wilson's translation, because she doesn't get the repetitions in there, so you don't even get it. But the core of the Odyssey is asking us to look at how Odysseus caused his own problems and suffering, and by transfer of that, to look at our own lives and say, how do we make our lives worse because of our stupidity? And as a corollary, can we make our lives better if we're not so stupid and vile and disgusing? So I think to answer your question, it works.
Oh, go ahead.
It works for me. No, I just say it works. I like the choices because it makes it a motivational, or at least motivating tale for a modern audience. And Josh, I'm sorry I spoke over you.
Oh, no, not at all. I think I think that was really amazing, analysis. And what was making me wonder was at the end of the movie, so much of what you're saying, it seems like there's a sense of guilt in Odysseus over the sack of Troy and all of like the destruction that took place, and the fact that he, like you said, sort of like fooled them into doing it. Um, did the ancient Greeks have any concept of sort of guilt for victory in battle against humans? Like if you know, if you outsmarted someone and ravaged their city, were you supposed to feel like you had misbehaved or not?
Well, so if you, again, you go on, you read the online discourse, you read the commentariat about this, they'll tell you no. I'm here to tell you that they're wrong, right? Because no, because like
Okay.
it's a basic principle of sociolinguistics is that just because you don't have a direct word for something in your culture doesn't mean the concept doesn't exist, right? The example that people always offer is Schadenfreude, right? Which is German for pleasure at somebody else's suffering. And a naive view would be, well, we don't have that word in our language, therefore we don't have that concept, which is absolutely not the case. We can all point to like delight at somebody else's sorrow, especially in sports, right? As a Red Sox fan, I can tell you that I root against teams as much as I root for teams, right? But the problem then, the burden falls on me to prove a negative. Right? Like if they say it's not there, how can I say it's there? And I'll give you just a couple quick examples, and I'll give you two from Homer. One, at the end of the Iliad, is Priam meeting Achilles. Right? When Achilles has come, when Priam comes to Achilles to beg to ransom his son's father back. And Priam says, think of your father who has no one to protect him like me. And the narrative says the two of them then weep together, thinking of their suffering and their own losses. And so you can look at that and say, well, people are just having their own feelings there. But throughout the Iliad, especially around Achilles, we see that witnessing somebody else's grief makes you think of your own, and then is supposed to make you understand what you do to other people matters, right? And it's significant. Similarly in the Odyssey, when Odysseus asks for the story of the Trojan horse, and this is really important in book 8, it's the third story he hears from the bard Demodocus, and he asks for it, he hears it, and he starts crying. You can look at that and think of it cynically, well, Odysseus is doing this so people pay attention to him, because then immediately his host Alcinous is like, hey man, what's your story, right? But there's a powerful simile, and it says Odysseus is crying just as a woman standing on the wall of the city as she looks down on her husband who's been killed and the city's about to be sacked. And Odysseus it was supposed to be internalizing or understanding that Odysseus has internalized what's happened, and that he sees the pain that he's caused in the world and that he's suffered. And again, you can say, well, maybe he's just thinking about himself and everything. But if you return to the Athenian stage and tragedy, there's a constant concern for what our violence does to other people. What happens repeatedly in Athens in plays like the Hecuba, the Andromache, the Trojan Women, all plays by Euripides, being written when Athens is engaged in warfare against its neighbors and doing things like sacking cities. Each one of these plays focuses on the experience of the people who are suffering as a reflection of what we do in the world. So I don't know if we call it guilt in the same way, but the Greeks have a concept of miasma. And that's when you do bad in the world, there's something almost physical that attaches to you that makes you cursed. And that to me is an indication that, we have lots of ways of talking about guilt, right? Or talking about responsibility. But just because we externalize it and use indirect ways of doing it doesn't mean that we don't feel it. Like we've all heard people say something like, the devil made me do it. Perhaps in some very literal situations, people think there's a devil making them do something, but it's also a social linguistic thing. It allows us to acknowledge that you did something without acknowledging that maybe it's something that was core or intrinsic to you. So I think fundamentally the Greeks had a concept of right or wrong. They did feel bad about it. And any notion, and I'm going to perhaps make this too political here, but I'll do it anyway. Any notion that they didn't have guilt is a particularly ideological move to try to claim we shouldn't have guilt now and that we as the West can do whatever we want. and we shouldn't feel bad about all the people sitting in refugee camps around the world because of the wars we've been waging. And so to deny Nolan's guilty hero because the ancients didn't have guilt is just a nonsense move to try to avoid responsibility and guilt for what we've been doing now.
You've mentioned a couple times about how Nolan would have to adapt the work for a modern audience, and you mentioned like kind of like the Homeric spirit. And I studied Norse mythology a bit. I mean, I'm not like super well versed. I'm not an academic, but one of the things that was interesting in the course of learning about myth through that was that audiences at that time experienced stories differently than we do. They weren't as focused on like the specific plot, and they were far more interested in how a specific storyteller was able to tell a story about characters that they already knew. Like you said, they knew everything about Odin and all these various characters, and it was really the skill of the narrator.
Yeah.
Was it similar with the Greeks in the sense that like they knew everything, and it was really more about the order and the way the story was told than it was the specific plot, hitting this plot and that plot and, going from A to Z in a linear fashion?
No, you are 100% right there. And Greek mythical storytelling is completely transparent about this. So one of the things in the background of Homer is Homer's complement, Hesiod, who's another poetic tradition that tells the story of the creation of the universe from the beginning to our time. And before he even tells that story, he says, well, I was just a shepherd on the road to Mount Helicon, and the muses showed up and they said to me, hey, country bumpkin, we know how to tell stories that sound like the truth, but we know how to tell the truth when we want to. And just leaves that aside, right? And I often leave that as like, this is a caveat lector in a way, like, hey, be aware of what we're going to see, right? But at the same time, it's acknowledgement that people know different narrative traditions, that to be a mono cultural narrative like Homer and Hesiod, you need to be ambiguous enough or flexible enough for people to be able to read themselves into it. But it also, and I think it's actually more complicated, I think it's also about what you got to, Joe, the difference between coherence and correspondence. Right. So these terms come from like studies in memory. And it's really important for things like crime studies and like police studies, because after a crime or an accident, people don't report the facts. They don't correspond to reality. And instead, they select facts to cohere with their notion of what the world is like, what they are like, what other people are like, who's responsible. And I think what Hesiod's trying to say, and what myth does, is you're supposed to focus on the story in question, right? How does it work? How do we respond to it? How do the pieces work together? Not, is it completely faithful to the last version we heard? And I think generally we've like adapted to this reasonably well in the modern world. I mean, how many Spider-Man movies have we had? Right. There are core versions, right? There are a couple major variants, but everyone is slightly different. And we have to go watch another one this weekend, I guess. Right. And so it's really about that. But there's also one more thing. And I know I'm going on too long about this, which is a difference in aesthetics. Right. When you go to Greek literature, whether it is a dialogue by Plato or a play by Euripides or a poem about an athletic contest by Pindar, each one assumes that it is a self-contained universe. You don't need anything from without it to make sense of it. Everything in that narrative universe refers to itself. You can draw from the other world, but you can vary within reason. And part of the power of Homer is seeing where the poem varies from the tradition and doesn't, right? Achilles always dies, Hector's always dies, the city always falls, Aeneas always survives. But within those basic boundaries, there's lots of room for flexibility. And I'll close this rant on this note. There's a metaphysical significance to that, because what it impresses upon audiences is that we all have boundaries. There are things in life we cannot change. But within those, we still have some choice and ability to affect the world around us. And so the narrative fluctuation in myth is as significant as any ethical statement you could make, because it allows us to navigate between what we cannot change and what we can.
That seems to me like, I mean, Nolan's like core thing in his filmography is grappling with what you just said. Like, we have a limited amount of time and we have limited knowledge, but we have to make decisions anyway. Like, how are we going to do it? What are we going to do within those constraints? I mean, that seemed like what
Yeah.
Oppenheimer was all about. I think he did it better in that movie, but
Yeah.
that seems like
Memento too. But yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think, yeah, Memento. I mean, again, I'm still angry that Memento didn't get best screenplay in the year it came out, because I think it was amazing. And Guy Pearce, it tricked me into thinking Guy Pearce was a great actor. Sorry, he doesn't deserve collateral damage like that. Sorry.
Okay.
Right. But the difference, though, I think between Oppenheimer and the Odyssey is that Oppenheimer was a story that had never been told. Right. People went into it with some knowledge of like, okay, there's going to be a bomb and that's important. And and Oppenheimer's kind of a weird character. He also, he wrote Pindaric poetry on his own. He learned ancient Greek and experimented with writing verse in ancient Greek.
Wow.
He was a wild guy. But with the Odyssey, Nolan is, I mean, look, he's got to know that there was hubris involved in taking on the Odyssey, right? You don't take on the Odyssey unless you either don't care or you think that you're up to it. And I think the challenge of the Odyssey is this story people think they know. And those expectations can sometimes go against, the director's like intent or desire for the movie's reception.
So another question about like the war stuff. One thing that really struck me about the movie, or kind of also, so in ancient Greece, right? It's really important how you honor the dead, right? How you kind of bury, like, I feel like across Greek tragedy, this is a big problem when people are not buried or when they aren't honored sufficiently for in whatever the way is.
Yep.
And one thing that really struck me about the movie was like, I think it felt like there wasn't a lot of room for the idea that these people had sacrificed themselves for something greater in battle. Like, I think at one point they talk about how like, the whole reason the war in Troy was even waged wasn't about Helen. It was about like trade routes.
Trade routes. Yeah.
Right. I guess my question is almost like less about that. Like, what do you think that says like about how what Nolan is saying about America? Because it feels like that is like totally gone. Like, at least for like not all across the culture, but for a lot of it, this idea that like there's any kind of like greater sacrifice going on there.
So with the first, you're absolutely right about Greek tragedy, the importance of burial. If you read the Iliad carefully, it actually develops that theme of the burial of funerary rites as being a fundamental universal human right. That's something that the Iliad shows as being part of its own narrative. So there's some weird stuff going on. I think that's not fully realized in the movie when it comes to the burial of the dead, because there are 2 or 3 situations where people ask Odysseus if he's going to bury someone. Like Telemachus asks it about Mentor. It's asked in the cave of the Cyclops, and Odysseus is like, we'll honor him by living. We'll honor him in the end. And, it's a slightly sacrilegious thing in Homer. But it does happen. I mean, Odysseus has to be reminded by Elpenor when he goes to the underworld that he died and he needs to be buried. So you can sort of promise to do it later. But the notion of how to honor war dead and what we're doing, I don't know. I think Nolan is reflecting perhaps what you said there, which is that we don't seem to really respect it. I mean, we've had in the US for a couple decades now, chief executives that don't seem to care about how we spend the lives of our service people. Current president who is not willing to give honors fully to people in an appropriate way who have sacrificed their lives for our country. So I do think we've lost that. The first time Agamemnon is really weird in Nolan's movie. Like, I don't get why we have a Darth Vader, Batman, Agamemnon. I don't understand. Yeah, I don't understand why Odysseus kneels to him. But when we hear that it's about trade routes, I mean, one, isn't that why most of our wars are fought? But 2, it also made me think it was an intertextual relationship with Troy, because Wolfgang Petersen's Agamemnon is all about the trade routes, right? He's all about the political power of it. It's not really about Helen. So I think, generally speaking, making it not about Helen should be a good way to get away from some traditional misogyny. But Nolan found a way to maybe let that stuff seep in anyway.
What made you interested in Homer and the classics in the first place?
It's a good question because it's a weird thing. Until like this year, when I would tell people I study Homer, they would look at me like I'm insane or a weirdo, or they'd not want to talk about it anymore. My favorite anecdote, I'll indulge myself by telling this to you, is at some point, I think it was 2017 or so, I was in a Starbucks in Milton, Massachusetts, waiting to pick my kids up from a dance class, and Jordan Knight from New Kids on the Block came in. He lives in Milton, owns some restaurants there. I texted my sister, hey, Jordan Knight is here. And she's like, you have to get a picture with him. I'm like, fine, whatever. So I go up, I introduce myself. I'm like, hey, can I get a picture with you? My sister is a huge fan. She's actually gone to see New Kids on the Block as an adult, which I find horrifying. And so we had a great conversation. I'm like, cool, I'm hanging out with Jordan Knight. And then he said, so what do you do? I'm like, I'm a professor. And he's like, oh, cool. What are you a professor of? I was like, ancient Greek. And the conversation withered on the vine. Like it was over at that point. Like suddenly, like I went from being slightly interesting to being someone he had to get away from. So for most of my career, people have been like, well, I know what Homer is, but it's super weird to do that. So now I don't want to talk to you anymore. And even my wife, I've been with my wife since 1997. We're not that old, but we met like as first week of undergrad. She doesn't talk to me about Homer. She's just like, I love you. I appreciate you as a person, but I just don't care. Like Homer's not my thing. And I sometimes am surprised. The guilty thing I will admit to you is that when I first read Homer in high school and in college, I was like, I don't get it. I don't care. Let me do something else. I was really into the Roman poet Catullus. I was really just into literature in general. And then my junior year of college, I'd taken Greek because you had to be a classics major. I read the Iliad in Greek for the first time. And it blew me away. Like in Greek, it is different from anything else I've ever read. I'd read a lot of Latin epic, I've read Virgil, but line by line, Homer unpacks meaning in a way that's unlike any other literature I've read. And I consider myself at this point reasonably well read. I found it moving. I also found it curious that I was so moved by something and I didn't understand why. And so I started out in doing a senior thesis on similes in Homer as an undergraduate, just to try to figure out why does it move me? How does Homeric poetry work? And 27 years later, I'm still trying to figure out how Homer works. I was an Iliad guy for a long time. I sort of converted to the Odyssey, and believe it or not, in Homeric studies, there's typically a split. Are you an Iliad person or an Odyssey person? I go both ways now. But it's something that it's proven to be what I do. Like when people ask me, what are you? I don't say I'm a classicist anymore because I actually don't care about most of the questions my field asks. Like I'm still just like 100% in on like, how does Homeric poetry work? And what does the function of Homeric poetry tell us about how we engage with the world, who human beings are, and how narrative works? And so for me, Homer becomes sort of a test case or a metonym for exploring all of those things.
Do you have a favorite god from the Greek pantheon?
I did not expect you to go there.
Yeah. And if so, how do you worship that god?
Oh, how do you worship that god? All right. So my favorite god, I have to say, my favorite god is Hermes. All right. Which may be a surprise. But it's because for two reasons. One, because of what Hermes represents, and two, because of the story of Hermes as a baby. Right. So I'll start with that first. Have you guys heard of the Homeric hymn to Hermes?
No.
Okay. So it's the funniest thing from ancient Greece because the whole idea is that he's born He's a baby, and as a baby, he steals a bunch of cattle from his brother Apollo. He invents a lyre, and then he lies to Zeus about it, and like fights with Apollo in order to get some of like his rights. Like, it is absurd. Like, do yourself a favor, read the Homeric hymn to Hermes, because I always imagine Stewie from The Family Guy as Hermes going around doing these crazy things, and it's hysterical. But the other reason is that Hermes is the god of translation. The reason he can be a god of theft, but also against theft, of the underworld, but also of dreams, is that he, in a way, is fundamentally like Odysseus, to whom he's related, because he can move from one domain to another. He takes you from the realm of the living to the realm of the dead. He takes you from one language to another. He moves information from back and forth. And he also reflects, like, the duality of human nature and of the gods to begin with. Now, how to worship Hermes? I mean, not an
That's
expert.
such a serious segue. I'm sorry.
All right. He wants you to cut up cattle and give them to him, right? This is good. The gods want meat.
So, when I was in college, there was a religious studies professor who, basically, I think he got in trouble for this, but he sacrificed a goat and burnt the entrails.
He got in trouble for this.
Yeah, well, because he killed an animal and like burnt the entrails to try to basically replicate like an ancient like divination tradition.
Look, experimental religious studies should get more respect, right? But I had a friend in grad school, so I lived in Astoria in grad school, and I had a friend who got obsessed with hepatoscopy, which is divination by looking at livers. And so in especially among Etruscans, but Romans, like, you're supposed to be able to get a liver out and look at its shape and nodes and everything and tell the future. And so he wanted to know a little bit more about what this was like. So we would go to butcher shops in Astoria, and he'd bring livers home and just look at them. I got to tell you, there's only so much chopped liver you can eat before you never want to eat it again.
No, but this is good because, we are trying to figure out editorial strategy. And I think that, we can start looking at, like animal livers.
Yeah,
but also,
is there to go?
Because, like, I know with Norse mythology, there's like a movement to kind of return to like Nordic paganism. Is there anything equivalent with ancient Greek? Is that what you call it? Ancient Greek paganism? Like, what would you?
Yeah, so I think they call themselves neo-pagans. And so return, and there are different flavors of them. Like, there are some that are just sort of like holdovers from 60s, 70s New Age movements. Then you get some that actually overlap with, like, white supremacy groups. Like Golden Dawn, and which is a weird thing because, like, on the one hand, you have some white supremacists who are like, Europe and US, they're a Christian nation, and then you get offshoots that, and we have these with Norse religion as well, who are like, no, like, if we really want to be real, we got to go back to the days before this Christian stuff and worship the old gods. So the neo-pagans who hail from the New Agey stuff, are really, in a way, like classic pagans, in that at the core, I think they're monotheists, but they're just seeing, different versions of divinity in the world, and returning to ancient practices, not in a, let's say, dogmatic, everybody has to do it way.
Right. It's so interesting to me, though, that like far right, or no, Joe, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Josh. You follow up.
Oh, just that like far right nationalists in Greece are like using Zeus or the gods as like a symbol of. That's wild to me. Yeah.
I mean, look, what are you going to do? I mean, if you want to say, all right, I want to dial back civilization to a point where there's no diversity, like, well, how far back do you have to go? Because their version of ancient Greece is also a total lie, because, like, it was actually a fairly diverse place in the Eastern Mediterranean. So yeah, it's wild, but as a Scandinavian American who was sent to Norwegian summer camp as a child and play acted Viking, I can tell you that this stuff has been hotbeds of white supremacy training for a long time.
Wait, I was going to ask, talk more about, what was that you just said? You went to Viking camp?
I did not. I went to Norwegian language camp as a child in northern Minnesota. My grandparents wanted me to speak Norwegian, and I didn't realize how much of it was going to be really weird. Like we're going to act like settlers and build sod houses and live in them, and then like really get into like Scandinavian, like Viking lore and stuff. We also had to give up our names. Like I had to take a Scandinavian only name, not a Christian one. So it was really sort of cult grooming type of stuff. In retrospect, clearly it didn't stick.
Is it a settled thing, like who Homer was? Like, was there a Homer or several people? Maybe was it a composite? Do we know?
Yeah. So again, I'll try not to keep this to. I care deeply, but not as much as I used to. Right. Here's the thing: there was no Homer. Anybody who tells you there was a Homer is probably full of crap, or they're reading Wikipedia and then not all the way to the end of the entry, right? It's very clear from ancient biographical traditions that Homer was owned by everybody. It's clear from how the text developed that it didn't come in one time and place. The debate as it stands now is everyone accepts that Homer is a metaphor. And the question is, does that metaphor stand for the oral tradition that developed the poem? Or is it about the last person who adapted that oral tradition into a textualized form that we know? And that choice makes a difference on how you interpret the poems. If you go to it and you're like, the poems are about one person and one person put them into their shape, when you see inconsistencies or multiforms, you want to change them. You want to homogenize it, right? And it makes the way you interpret the poem different. So I'll give you an example in a minute. On the other hand, if you acknowledge the oral tradition and that we don't really know how it made the leap from performance to text, but that doesn't matter, then you can be much more flexible and I think expansive in interpretation and in what you accept as genuine and legitimate or not. One of my great frustrations with some recent translations is that they come at Homer from a completely textualist perspective. They really think that the Iliad and the Odyssey were shaped by single minds that more or less mirror the translators, and you get choices based on that and authorial intention and all of that stuff. You lose a lot of the ambiguity and power that I think is native to the epics in Greek.
And I think there was just one question we wanted to go out on, which is, is there a portrayal of the Odyssey in film or literature that you like more than any other? Like, is there one?
Can I give you a couple?
People?
Can I give you a couple?
No. Please.
So I think creative or retellings are some of the most insightful interpretations of Homer you can find. I think Margaret Atwood's Penelopiad is a brilliant reconsideration of the story. That actually is far beyond most Homeric scholarship prior to it, at least in understanding the place of women in Homer's poems. I think you're not going to buy this, but I think Rambo First Blood is a homecoming narrative.
Okay.
That's actually pretty good. If you want to think about the complexity of a warrior returning home. I think that's one of the better ones. And in thinking about how creative retellings can help us reconsider parts of the narrative, I think Epic the Musical is really clever and inventive, and reads into things into the poem some powerful things. So I'll just give you one example there. There's a song called Love in Paradise from Epic the Musical that's actually between Calypso and Odysseus. And Calypso's trying to get Odysseus to pay attention to her. And we realize that Odysseus has been losing his mind because he spent years thinking about losing his men and his failure, right? This isn't in Homer. What we get in Homer is 2 lines. And the lines are, Hermes found Odysseus there sitting by the sea, crying all day, every day, but sleeping with Calypso at night, even though she was no longer pleasing to him. That's all we get. We get no explanation of why he was crying. The poem kind of implies it's because he's missed Penelope, but it doesn't make it clear. And so what Jorge Rivera Herranz, who wrote the Epic Musical, did is he read into those 2 lines Odysseus's emotional state and reflecting on his experience at war. And it's interventions like that that I think are really important, because if they make me read Homer differently, then they're successful.
I actually have one last question that's going to drive me nuts if I don't ask it, which is you mentioned when that Homer clicked for you really when you read it in the ancient Greek. And then you said you're still trying to figure out what it was about Homer that, why you love it. But I'm curious, is there something about the structure of ancient Greek that lends itself to that deeper meaning?
100%.
Is there a way to explain that?
I'll do it right now as best as I can. And so I'll do it with the Odyssey to stay on theme. All right. So the first line of the Odyssey is Andra moi enepa musa polutropon hosmalapala. Right. So the first word Andra. All right. So wait, that's one line. So the first thing that's important is, unlike other forms of epic poetry, you don't need to go to the next line to make sense of it, because everything you need grammatically and semantically is in a given line. And this is true almost through all of Homer. And when it's enjammed in the next line, it's something special. So that's one thing. The second thing is the words are music, right? It's much closer to music. If you hear three notes together and you've heard a melody before with that three notes, your brain makes a connection in a way that it doesn't when you're reading something. So imagine if you're listening to a song that has repeated phrase structures, repeated tones, that you've been hearing versions of your entire life, right? So that amplifies it. And so each word becomes charged. To go back to the first line of the Odyssey, Andra, the first word, is crucial because, one, it means a human being, right? This is a story not of a semi-divine hero, but of a person like us, right? And so that's breaking with the heroic tradition and telling a different type of story. Right? Moi enepa, speak to me, muse, is fine. But then you get the polutropon, the word that everyone likes to argue about because Emily Wilson translated it as complicated. But it's two different parts. Poly means many, tropos means turn. And it can be like trope now, so motif, right? Or something that's repeated, or it can be physical turning. So at one moment, the word polutropos both refers to a hero who travels around a lot, but also who has many shapes and forms. And while listening to the music, audiences could accommodate those multiple meanings at once without disambiguating them. And so because of the limited vocabulary set, the repetitions and similar contexts, words are supercharged with meanings. Like they're almost dripping meanings out in ways that are uncontrollable, that's very hard to achieve in a modern language that's not in a restricted artistic dialect. And so that's like just that first line of the Odyssey. And also notice it does not include the name of the hero it's talking about, because those words are supercharged enough that if you're Andra Polutropon, everyone knows the name of the guy you're talking about.
Really? That epithet
yeah.
would be enough.
Right.
Almost like wow.
Totally. So there's a dialogue by Plato called the Lesser Hippias, which I think you guys would like, because it's basically just a bunch of guys philosophizing about whether or not Achilles or Odysseus is better. It's like the Superman versus Batman of ancient philosophy. Like it is, and it says, what type of hero is Odysseus? And the answer is he is the most polutropos hero. Right. And so you just get, like, without defining it, you get the repetition of this word because it defines him. And so that's like one example of like how powerful it is. And if you'll indulge me, just 45 seconds, beginning of the Iliad is goddess sing the rage of Pele and Achilles. But in Greek, it's meinen aedetheia pelea do akaleos. The first word meinen, it means rage, but it's rage that only gods get to have against cosmic disorder, with the one exception of Achilles, who, because he is part god, can have this rage, but when he has that rage, it destroys the world, right? And so, like, you can't get that in English. You don't get that association. And so it's that, like, each word has depths to it that can be mined for years. And so maybe part of the attraction of the Iliad and the Odyssey is that they're giant puzzles I can never like solve. But I think part of it is, and this may be more mystical or romantic, I think it's also a testament to how deep human artistic achievement can be when multiple people are involved over time. Like the depth, the meaning we can make with each other is such that, like, we create worlds with it. And that to me is just, it's dumbfounding to be able to say it and study it for as many years as I have.
I feel like if
That
we
was
don't
really
stop
beautiful.
now, I'll have like 4 hours of questions.
Yeah, but that was also like a stunning way to go out. Like that was like the on the fly analysis of ancient Greek in the Greek is really, really cool. So,
that was great.
No, I know I wish more people could do it. I wish we had a culture that gave people the time and resources to do it. But as long as I'm on this earth, I'm going to try to make sure that the conversation keeps going.
Well, maybe we'll have you back on. We'll have to figure out a reason to just do this again. That'd be great.
You know how to find me.
Yeah, we did.
Thank you so much. We're in the same city.
Yeah,
no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.